seems to be getting the very few Republicans who are speaking out angry. Mitt Romney, Susan Collins of Maine, Ben Sasse. What they are upset about is what the president himself is saying out loud on the
here in
South
New York.
Lawn. In particular, China. Come on, investigate my political opponent. I mean, he is making it worse continually, whether or not you can get those three to get to the point where they consider it an impeachable offense. That's an open question. But you have simultaneously this investigation and the president himself making it worse and making a lot of Republicans I talk to, sigh, roll their eyes, and pull out their hair.
He's in some ways his own best whistleblower, because every time he speaks in public, he draws new scrutiny to himself and the things he's saying. Now, even though he's saying it out loud, even though there is evidence here for all of us to read, there are some Republicans who are saying, it's all just a joke. You just don't get it. You don't get the president's incredibly savvy sense of humor. Listen to this.
I don't think it's a real request. I think he did it to gig you guys.
I doubt if the China comment was serious, to tell you the truth.
You really think he was serious about thinking that China's going to investigate the Biden family?
So, Jeffrey, how effective is that as an argument, again, when we have the evidence of the president leading on other world leaders to investigate?
Who's never said he was joking?
I mean, remember, the joke defense is a big part of the Trump playbook. The famous speech he gave during the campaign, Russia, if you're listening, find Hillary Clinton's emails. He later said that was a joke. That happened to be the day that the Russian hacking began, so Russia didn't apparently take it as a joke. Look, I mean, you can manufacture defenses. This is why lawyers go to law school, is that they learn how to spin something out of, very unpromising material. But I think ultimately where the Trump defense is going is not that the relationship between Ukraine and the United States did not exist. It's simply that I did it and it's okay. And that, there is nothing wrong with asking for dirt on my political opponent, because the evidence is so overwhelming that that's what happened.
And let's be clear. Those comments from Republicans, particularly Marco Rubio, he was the first to make that comment late last week, that's deflection. I mean, that is the art of the punch.
I need to become okay.
Sparking
Trump. I mean, that's a nice way of saying it. Yeah. I mean, it's deflection at a minimum. It doesn't even begin to address
fury on Twitter.
What you have to say is you shouldn't ask another country to investigate a political opponent. And they won't even have the
especially
courage to
from
say
somebody
that.
like Marco Rubio, who really is a hawk on, of all countries, China.
But even the more aggressive defenders like Lindsey Graham, you notice they're not defending the conduct. They're attacking the process. They're saying Adam Schiff is is doing a bad job. They're saying it's all hearsay evidence. They're saying that this is another whistleblower like the ones that came after Kavanaugh. They're not defending the underlying conduct, which appears to be, at least at the moment, indefensible.
There's another version of this, too, which is what we saw from Ron Johnson, who is the chair of the Senate Homeland Security Committee, Dana, which, as you know, means that one of his jobs is to keep elections safe, like the next one. But he refuses, it seems, to admit that the Russians attacked the last one. Listen to what he said on Meet the Press.
I just want the truth. The American people want the truth.
So do you not trust the FBI? You don't trust the CIA?
No,
I'm just very confused here.
Absolutely
you don't trust
not.
either
After
of those
Peter Strzok and
agencies.
Lisa Page?
Okay.
After James Comey,
you believe the FBI and the CIA,
John Brennan? No, I don't trust any of these guys in the Obama administration. I don't trust any of them.
You don't trust them now? You trust them now?
No, I didn't trust them back then.
So it's a bit of a word salad there, Dana. But remember, the FBI and the CIA, their job, among others, is to help keep these elections safe. And the chair of the Homeland Security Committee just said he didn't trust them.
I'm so glad that this came out and that you played it, because Ron Johnson, I've talked to him about this more than once. He fundamentally believes that. This isn't him giving Republican spin. He fundamentally believes that everything that happened is a hoax, and that there was, these are my words, not his, a deep state in the FBI, CIA, elsewhere in the government trying to undermine a potential Trump election. And the reason it's important to hear that from someone with such power as he has, not only a senator from a very important swing state, Wisconsin, but the chair of the Homeland Security Committee, is because that is the feeling and the perspective of so many of his constituents and other Republican constituents across the country. And therein lies the divide. You have a divide over basic facts. And how do you bridge that? That's the question.
So when you have the chair of the Homeland Security Committee, when you have a powerful senator in the United States saying flat out he does not trust the CIA or the FBI, not the former heads of the CIA, FBI, not former FBI officials, but current, what does that say about where we are as a country right now in our democracy?
What it says is that there is a Fox News universe. Ron Johnson is very much a resident of that universe. And there is the reality-based community, and that is where we are. And you know, I make no apology for drawing a distinction between people who actually follow facts and people who are completely agenda-driven and, you know, preaching to their choir constantly. Fox News is a very important institution. It is not the whole country. Breitbart and Gateway and that whole universe of make pretend news is, it's a big factor, but it is not the whole country either.
And it all goes back, as we wrap up, to your piece that I suggest everybody read in the New Yorker. Trump's Ukraine scandal has its roots in Russia because Russia benefits from all of this chaos right now.
Well, and the Mueller report sets the stage for what happened in Ukraine.
It's a great piece, Jeff.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And if you don't believe the Russians attacked the last election, how are you going to keep them doing it again?
Exactly.
Period. Breaking overnight, U.S. troops have begun withdrawing from northern Syria, which clears the way for Turkey to invade the region. Most importantly, the move essentially abandons the Kurdish fighters who fought alongside U.S. forces against ISIS in Syria. Joining us now is CNN military analyst, retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. General, what message does this send to people who fight alongside the U.S., not just in the Middle East, but around the world?
John, this is devastating across the board on so many ways. It's devastating for anyone who has an alliance with us, who has had an alliance with us in the past and looks to work for us in the future. It's devastating for the military planners that are on the ground and the soldiers that are working with the Kurdish allies. It gives a NATO ally, which is part of the complexity of all this, the opportunity to do some things that will significantly affect not only the Middle East, but also the European footprint. And I think it will certainly provide an impetus for the war against ISIS to be renewed in a much bigger way than it already was being renewed. So there are so many things you could talk about that are complicated by this action, this spur of the moment action, if you will, by the White House. It's just incredibly jaw-dropping from my perspective.
And let's remember that former Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, the general, he quit largely over something much like this in the fall. When the president announced unilaterally the U.S. was withdrawing all troops from Syria, Mattis quit. The president then backed off that. And if you want to talk about real world and instant implications here, we're hearing from the Syrian Democratic Forces that what they've done is they've pulled back from guarding ISIS prisoners overnight so they could fight the Turks who are invading right now, which means what? It means that there will be ISIS prisoners, people who were captive, on the loose again?
Yeah, I think that's an important point to bring out, John, because as we hear this commentary about, quote, ISIS prisoners, there are 70,000 ISIS prisoners in one of the camps that's not in the zone of what we anticipate to be the Turkish operation. So those are going to be released, and they are not just prisoners as we would think of them, in orange jumpsuits, all men being in jail. These are families. It's a family concentration camp of those who have come from Iraq and Syria to fight as part of the caliphate. So it is a much more dangerous situation. That's why I say it will lend to a greater surge within the ISIS opportunities to continue to attack. This is devastatingly bad. And you add to that the fact that European Command, U.S. European Command, last week announced that they would take down the barriers in northern Syria and protect this as a safe zone for the Kurds. They've already disestablished those barriers, which gives the Turkish army and military an opportunity to come in a lot more smoothly smoothly and without any defenses provided by the Kurds. The Kurds have been thrown under the bus multiple times by the U.S. government. It's unfortunate. I worked with the Kurds in northern Iraq when I was there. They are a great population, and this area is all part of the Kurdish diaspora, which the Turks have said they've wanted to disestablish for decades. This isn't just something that's happened in the last several weeks.
General, who fills the void here? Yes, the Turkish troops are moving in, but what other countries then fill this absence?
Well, there's a, I hate to keep beating the drum on this, John, but this is a recurring theme. Russia could certainly fill the void, not only in contributing to the Turkish operations, but also the Kurds could go, and there's been indicators that they've gone to them in the past and saying, we need help in defending ourselves. Because from a strategic perspective, that puts America at an even more extreme long-term disadvantage. Russia is stepping in when we step out. So we are made to look like the fools. Our allies think we're idiots because we have stepped out, and Russia is coming to the rescue, not only with the Kurds, but also I'd comment this weekend, the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov was with the Iraqi Prime Minister this weekend talking about partnering in defensive measures. So every time America steps out of anything in the Middle East, Russia steps in.
Very quickly.
Iran is also benefiting from this in a great way because they will continue to man the counter-ISIS approaches.
Very quickly. This is something that we were told that President Trump was trying to convince the Turkish leader Erdogan not to do. What does it tell you about the president's strength right now on the international stage if he couldn't convince a U.S. ally of something like this?
Well, President Trump tweeted boldly that he had talked Erdogan out of this several months ago. So yeah, if you take a look at a global perspective, in every case where the president has claimed victory, ISIS, North Korea, Russia, Iran, northern Syria, he has failed miserably. And it keeps coming back that this is bluster. It's a maximalist strategy with a very minimalist approach, not putting any effort in it. And Secretary Pompeo has not been that contributing in terms of our foreign policy around the world, as Colin Powell said yesterday on one of the news shows. It's a disaster.
All right, just in, CNN has new reporting this morning on how former Vice President Joe Biden is grappling with the attacks coming from the president, and also, at the same time, the rise of Elizabeth Warren in the Democratic field. CNN's Jeff Zeleny is live in Washington with this new development. Jeff.
Hey, John, good morning. I mean, Joe Biden has long wanted nothing more than this moment, a head-to-head matchup with President Trump to show Democrats that he is the strongest person in the party to take on the president. But now that is a very open question here, if this whole conversation and the impeachment inquiry is actually good for the former vice president. Over the weekend in Philadelphia, donors gathered. The vice president was there as well, spoke to him for about 45 minutes or so, trying to ease any concerns about this moment in the Biden campaign. Now, the Biden campaign will argue that it is a good moment for them because it shows that he can stand up to the president. But, John, when you talk to people behind the scenes, there is deep uncertainty about if this is indeed good for Joe Biden going forward. One longtime confidant we spoke to under the condition of anonymity so we could speak about internal matters inside the campaign told us this. Let's take a look. He said, "I'm not going to sit here and say there is no concern as this drags on. We just don't know. No one knows." Of course, going forward here, the Biden campaign has certainly strengthened their the argument that they're making against the president. Joe Biden was in a Washington Post op-ed over the weekend saying he's not going to back down. But they also don't want to be distracted by this entire conversation. So we do have a campaign memo that the deputy campaign manager, Kate Bedingfield, sent out over the weekend after that donor meeting saying this. She said, "This campaign will continue to focus on the issues that impact people's lives while simultaneously hammering Donald Trump for his unprecedented abuse of power and correcting the record on the mountain of lies Trump and his allies can continue to spread about Joe Biden." So, John, there's no question they're operating on a variety of fronts here, but Elizabeth Warren could be the biggest threat of all to Joe Biden. She, of course, raised almost $25 million, as did Bernie Sanders. Joe Biden just raised $15 million. So that was a lot of the concern that was discussed over this weekend at this donor retreat in Philadelphia. So going forward here, Joe Biden is fighting a war really on three fronts, but it is that intense argument with the president that is worrying some of his allies the most. John.
All right, Jeff Zeleny, thank you very much for the new reporting this morning. Joining us now, Mark McKinnon, former senior advisor to the George W. Bush and John McCain campaigns, and Jess McIntosh, former director of communications outreach for the Hillary Clinton campaign. And Mark, I have to say, I've heard both arguments on the Joe Biden front, his response here. People like David Plouffe and others say, what Joe Biden's wanted all along is to have this be a one-on-one fight with President Trump here. So that provides an opportunity if and only if Biden rises to the occasion. But has he?
Well, the bad news is that everybody in politics knew that this moment was going to come about Hunter Biden and his son. And so it was surprising to a lot of us that he didn't come off the block stronger. It was pretty wobbly out of the gate on this. And I understand that because I've been in a lot of campaigns. You prepare for this. But anytime you talk about a candidate's family, there's an emotional response. It's like, you don't talk about my family. Well, the fact is there is kind of an issue here, and it hasn't been well explained. And in fact, there's a New Yorker article over the weekend about Hunter Biden's son and the explanation for this. And it's kind of old style politics, but clearly, but there's a human kind of story here that they haven't told yet. So the good news for Biden is that over the weekend, at least so far, there seems to be kind of a sympathetic response, and he's doing pretty well. The national polling holding up, and he's even doing better in Wisconsin. So we'll see.
But we also know, Jess, that as we've said repeatedly, there's no evidence of wrongdoing on Hunter Biden's part and his involvement in Ukraine and sitting on the board of Burisma. The prosecutor there said that as well. But given the optics alone, Republicans have pounced. But now you have at least 3 Democratic presidential candidates, Beto O'Rourke, Kamala Harris, and Amy Klobuchar, saying that they themselves would be uncomfortable if their vice president's children sat on a board of a foreign company. How much does that damage Biden?
Well, I think, first of all, when it comes to the children's foreign dealings, Biden is in a much, much stronger position than the current occupant of the White House. But I think because we have the current occupant of the White House and his children running all over the globe, enriching themselves in their brand, using the White House to do it, I think probably Democrats running for office want to make sure that that is not something that gets carried into the next White House. But I think Joe Biden should be on stronger footing here. It's foreign policy, which is 100% where he is the strongest in the field. Like I said, he's in a better position than Trump is, and the facts have been on his side from day one. This is the head-to-head, like Jeff said, that he has been looking for since he got into this race. So I'm waiting for him to seize this moment. It seems like it was crafted for him to do it.
I asked Pete Buttigieg about this, and he had a very good sort of typically Buttigieg response, which is, he said, listen, don't be distracted by the dangly objects. But he addressed my question because I pushed back. I said, what if you were vice president or president? He said, I would hold my family to a very high standard. And that was kind of a subtle, like, we're going to do things, new generation message.
Well, look, we'll see how this plays out on the debate stage. The CNN New York Times debate a little more than a week from now. I think that'll be very interesting how they answer the questions. But you brought up the polls. There's the Wisconsin poll. There's also a new poll out of South Carolina, which, of course, is a very important early primary state where Biden's more than just holding up there. He's at 41%, Elizabeth Warren's at 12%, Bernie Sanders at 10%. When you dig inside the numbers here, the number that's been super important for Biden in South Carolina and nationally is his support among the black vote, which is still at 50% in South Carolina. That tells me, Jess, that among the people who might very well decide who the Democratic nominee is, Biden still seems in fairly solid ground.
Yeah, Biden's still the front runner. Biden has been the front runner. He remains the front runner. He is the front runner at a moment where it is not often that the front runner who is currently here in the off year becomes the eventual nominee. So obviously things can move and change. We're going to see this field narrow significantly. Candidates are going to drop out before anybody ever gets to cast a vote. So I think we're going to see momentum shift. We've seen Elizabeth Warren rise during a critical moment, but right now we've got a pretty solid top tier, which is I think why next week's debate is even more important.
John, I'll tell you, I know from personal experience how fast those firewalls melt. We were up 18 points in South Carolina before New Hampshire. We lost New Hampshire, and the next day we were behind 18 points.
Yeah, but you won South Carolina.
Barely.
But the African-American vote is crucial for Elizabeth Warren. She's run a seamless campaign other than this.
That's true.
She's introducing new policies directly aimed at the African-American vote. What can she do, and can she turn that around to her favor?
Yep, she can. You know what it is? Win. Win Iowa, win New Hampshire, they'll come aboard.
And then Bernie Sanders, obviously, in Burlington, Vermont, recovering from what we now know was a heart attack. Pure and simple. It took them 3 days to tell us it was a heart attack, but it was a heart attack. Senator Sanders, one of the most vigorous campaigners I've ever seen. He says he's going to be back out on the trail. I got no doubt he's going to be back out on the trail. But what impact does this have on the race for the senator, and also the idea of older candidates? Because there are a few.
Yeah, I mean, I think the possible health of every possible presidential nominee is something that needs to be discussed. There are plenty of people who have heart attacks and go on to live to be 100. Bernie Sanders is clearly, he's got the drive. I'm not concerned about that. But I do want to take a moment and point out how respectful and proportional the coverage of this story has been for Bernie Sanders while it's going on, and mention what happened in 2016 when Hillary Clinton's health was used as a manufactured and sexist cudgel. So I just want to remember this moment, and the next time that a woman candidate sneezes or overheats, I would like to treat it with the same respect that we are treating this one.
We will play this exact clip if that ever does happen. Thank you, Jess. Thank you. Good to have you.
Proof will be in the performance, of course, but there's a reason that the phrase is serious as a heart attack.
With first-hand knowledge of President Trump's dealings with Ukraine, this comes as two more diplomats will be deposed this week by Congress in the impeachment inquiry. Joining me now is Democratic Senator Chris Coons. He is on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, among other things, and he is a supporter of Joe Biden, the 2020 campaign. Senator Coons, thank you very much for being with us right now. Help us understand what the existence of this second whistleblower does to the case. Why is another person, what does he or she add, given the mountain of evidence that already exists?
Oh, well, John, I think this is partly why you hear nothing from my Republican colleagues about President Trump's jarring conduct in Ukraine and his recent action inviting on the South Lawn an investigation of his chief political rival, Joe Biden, by China and Ukraine, is that with additional facts coming out with an additional whistleblower, that's frozen a lot of Republicans in place out of fear that they don't know what's going to drop next. And I think it gives added urgency to the House impeachment inquiry as they try to get to the bottom of this, get the facts out, and get their inquiry moving forward quickly.
But what more information do you need at this point?
That's a fair question. Look, as the last week has unrolled, it's clearer that more and more senior members of this administration were either on the phone call or briefed about the phone call or actively engaged in efforts to try and persuade the newly elected president of Ukraine, Zelensky, to participate in what was an abuse of power by President Trump. He is alleged to have put pressure on Ukraine by withholding military aid that's badly needed by Ukraine. And so I think there is some more evidence that could be gathered here that'd be directly relevant about the role the Secretary of Energy, the Secretary of State, and the White House Acting Chief of Staff played in this matter. So that's some of the things that I think this second whistleblower may lend some light to.
You just noted the Republican response to this, and you brought up the president's comments on the South Lawn inviting China to investigate the president. Well, some Republicans haven't been silent about it. They just say the whole thing's a joke. Right. Listen.
I don't think it's a real request. I think, again, I think he did it to gig you guys.
I doubt if the China comment was serious, to tell you the truth.
You really think he was serious about thinking that China's going to investigate the Biden family?
What do you say to these Republicans, Senator?
I say that they're forgetting a very important recent chapter in history when in the middle of the 2016 campaign, President Trump openly said, Russia, if you're listening, it'd be great if you'd get to the bottom of Hillary's emails. As we know from the Mueller report, Russian military intelligence the next day began an effort to try and infiltrate Hillary Clinton's campaign email system. So to think that this is a joke at a time when we've heard from the director of the FBI, from the director of national intelligence, that our adversaries are going to interfere in our 2020 election, I think this is deadly serious. And I think it's no laughing matter to suggest that a president who openly abuses the office of president should be allowed to just laugh this off. That is a stunningly, I think, inappropriate defense.
Well, you brought up the Director of National Intelligence and the intelligence services here, and if we have the sound, I'd like to play Senator Ron Johnson, who is the chair of the Senate Homeland Security Committee, who now says he just doesn't believe the intelligence community, period, full stop. Listen to this.
I just want the truth. The American people want the truth.
So do you not trust the FBI? You don't trust the CIA?
No,
I'm just very confused here.
Absolutely
you don't trust
not.
either
After
of those
Peter Strzok and
agencies.
Lisa Page?
Okay.
After James Comey?
You believe the FBI and the CIA,
John
these
Brennan? No, I don't
government
trust any of
agencies?
these guys in the Obama administration. I don't trust any of them.
You don't trust them now? Do you trust them now?
No, I didn't trust them back then.
Talk to me about the impact here. given that the goal, I thought, was to protect the United States in the next election. What does that mean if the chair of the Senate Homeland Security Committee doesn't believe the findings from the intelligence community in the last election?
Well, that's part of the ways in which President Trump's unconventional leadership has now infected the most senior levels of the Republican leadership in the Senate. Senator Johnson of Wisconsin is the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee. And President Trump, from his times as a candidate, has said things that disrespect or undermine our intelligence community, publicly taking the word of Vladimir Putin over our own intelligence community, over our own FBI back in 2016, 2017. I watched that interview this weekend live, and my jaw was on the floor as Senator Johnson said, I don't believe the FBI, I don't believe the intelligence community. And I frankly think this should give all of us pause, because folks who are in leadership in the Congress, who are entrusted with protecting our national security, our homeland security, and our next election, are openly challenging and questioning the credibility of these important institutions in our life.
If I can talk about campaign politics for a moment, there is no bigger supporter on earth to the presidential campaign of Joe Biden than you, as far as I can tell. Maybe Dr. Jill Biden. But you were quoted in the New York Times this weekend in an article that I read saying, I can't believe that Joe Biden, the former vice president, told you of the attacks coming from President Trump. You said he told you, I can't believe this guy is going after my family like this. How could he not believe that Donald Trump would go after his family like this? Isn't that something that should have been assumed going into this race?
Look, it's one thing to know that Donald Trump is the kind of person who's going to just make things up about his opponents. I'll remind you famously that he accused Senator Ted Cruz, his opponent in the 2016 election, of having a father who assassinated JFK. And before Joe decided to run for the presidency, we had a heart-to-heart talk about what it might look like if he continued his pattern of just making up baseless smears. But it's another thing to actually have it happen, to have the President of the United States making up lies about your own family. And so, yes, when we were in Iowa together, former Vice President Biden expressed some agitation, some disappointment about this. But if you read his editorial in the Washington Post, you hear a clear-eyed, forceful Joe Biden who is both pushing back on the president's abuse of power and making it clear what he's focused on. Joe is focused on the ways in which Donald Trump has turned his back on America's families, and that he's focused on delivering proposals that will make the change that Donald Trump promised but hasn't delivered, reducing prescription drug prices, ending gun violence on the streets of America, strengthening our schools, combating climate change. Joe Biden, yes, is upset, disappointed about the ways in which Donald Trump is attacking his family, but his focus is on advancing the interests of America's families. And I think that contrast is an important one and a sharp one, especially on a day like today, where Donald Trump has made a decision to abandon the Kurds who fought alongside us in Syria in a move that will only advantage Russia and Iran, and that is exactly the ill-considered decision that made Jim Mattis resign in protest. So if you want to know who's going to be the best person to lead this country for our position of security and strength overseas, or for America's families here at home, I think it's Joe Biden. I think the developments of today have demonstrated that more clearly than ever.
We've been talking about the developments of Syria all